My name's Elwood, and for the longest time, I thought my life was pretty straightforward. I wasn't rich or famous, but I was content. I married a woman named Francine 10 years ago, and I thought we were happy. We had a modest home, steady jobs, and a quiet, predictable life in the suburbs. Nothing about us screamed exciting, but that's what I loved. Peaceful routines, nights spent watching old movies, and lazy Sunday mornings. I thought we had it all. Looking back, maybe I should have paid more attention to the small cracks. They were there, but I dismissed them. The way Francine started coming home later than usual, her vague explanations about last-minute meetings, and the sudden obsession with her appearance, new outfits, fresh makeup, even perfume she never used to wear. I told myself it was nothing. She's just trying to take better care of herself, I thought. Good for her. I didn't want to believe there was anything more to it. It was a chilly evening in late November when my world started unraveling. I had been working late, trying to finish up a project at the office. The streets were nearly deserted as I drove home, the orange glow of streetlights flickering through my windshield. I remember feeling relieved when I pulled into the driveway, looking forward to a quiet dinner with Francine. But as I stepped into the house, something felt off. The living room was spotless, too spotless. Francine wasn't much for cleaning during the week, but tonight, the house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Candles were burning on the dining table, their soft glow casting shadows on the walls. There was no dinner waiting, though, and the air smelled faintly of her favorite lavender cleaner. It felt staged, unnatural. I called out her name. No response. My stomach churned as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard faint voices coming from inside, hers and someone else's. A man's voice, deep and confident. My heart stopped. I pushed the door open. There they were, Francine and a man I didn't recognize, standing too close to each other. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an expensive suit that screamed power and wealth. Francine's hand rested on his chest, her cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. They turned to me at the same time, both frozen in shock. "Elwood," she stammered, stepping back from the man. "It's not what it looks like." But it was. It absolutely was. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was caving in, and my legs threatened to give out beneath me. I turned around and walked away, down the stairs, out the door, and into the cold night. Francine's voice called after me, desperate and pleading, but I didn't stop. I couldn't bear to look at her, to hear whatever excuses she had prepared. I got into my car and drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. The weight of what I'd seen settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and relentless. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. How long had this been going on? Who was that man? And why? Why wasn't I enough? I ended up parking at a quiet overlook just outside of town. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't wipe them away. For the first time in my life, I felt truly broken. As I sat there, alone with my thoughts, one thing became clear. My life would never be the same. Francine had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. But as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't go back. Whatever we had was gone, shattered beyond repair. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I spent hours driving aimlessly through the quiet streets of our town, the same streets that now felt foreign to me. The car became my cocoon, a fragile barrier between me and the storm of emotions clawing at my chest. Every time I thought about Francine, her hand on that man's chest, her flushed face, the sheer audacity of it all, I felt my grip on the steering wheel tighten. I finally stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. One of those places that's open 24 hours but never seems to have more than a handful of customers. The smell of burnt coffee and greasy food hit me as I walked in, but I didn't care. I slid into a booth in the corner, staring blankly at the menu as the waitress approached. "You look like you've had a rough night," she said with a small, sympathetic smile. If only she knew. "Yeah," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "Something like that." I ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, not because I was hungry, but because I needed something, anything, to occupy my hands. As I sat there, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Francine hadn't just hurt me. She had shattered the foundation of everything we'd built together. The betrayal felt personal, like a dagger aimed straight at my heart. I couldn't help but replay the scene in my mind, over and over again. Who was that man? He looked like the kind of guy you'd see in a boardroom or a country club, someone who didn't have to work for respect because it was handed to him on a silver platter. And then there was Francine, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, standing there as if she belonged by his side. The coffee grew cold in front of me as the hours slipped by. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my pocket, but I ignored it. I already knew who it was. Francine. Probably calling to explain herself, to weave some elaborate story about how it meant nothing, or how it just happened. But I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. At some point, I realized I couldn't sit in that booth forever. I paid my bill, leaving a generous tip for the kind waitress, and headed back to my car. The question of where to go loomed over me like a dark cloud. Going home felt impossible. The thought of seeing Francine, of facing her, made my stomach churn. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town and checked in for the night. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was quiet, and that's all I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wallpaper that was peeling in the corners. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I forced myself to look. There were 10 missed calls from Francine and a string of text messages. Elwood, please come home. We need to talk. It's not what you think. Just let me explain. I'm so sorry. Please answer me. Sorry? She was sorry? I threw the phone onto the bed, disgusted by the audacity of it all. Sorry didn't fix anything. Sorry didn't erase the image of her with that man. The way she looked at him like he was her entire world. Sorry didn't make this go away. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a battlefield, torn between anger, sadness, and a desperate longing to understand why this had happened. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. Was it my fault? Did I miss something? Had I failed her in some way? Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh light of reality. I couldn't hide in that motel room forever. I had to face the situation, no matter how much it hurt. But before I confronted Francine, I needed answers. I needed to know who that man was and how long this had been going on. I needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave the motel, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let Francine's betrayal define me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of my story. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had climbed high into the sky, casting harsh light on what felt like the ruins of my life. The house stood there, silent and imposing, like a monument to the life Francine and I had built. A life that now felt like a carefully constructed lie. I sat in the car for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, unsure if I had the strength to walk through that door. I knew Francine would be waiting. The texts and missed calls told me as much. She wanted to talk, to explain, to try and patch together what she had so carelessly destroyed. But I didn't want to hear her excuses. Not yet. I needed to focus on finding out the truth before I let her twist it into something palatable. When I finally stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. The faint scent of lavender cleaner lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the night before. My eyes scanned the living room, expecting to see Francine perched on the couch, ready to launch into her rehearsed speech. But she wasn't there. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Elwood, I'm at my sister's house. Please call me when you're ready to talk. I love you. Love me? The words felt like a slap in the face. Love wasn't sneaking around with another man. Love wasn't lying to your husband and tearing his heart out without a second thought. I crumpled the note in my hand and tossed it into the trash. Her absence was a small mercy. I wasn't ready to see her face. I made my way to the bedroom, the place where I had discovered her betrayal. The room looked the same as it always did, but now it felt tainted. My gaze fell on her nightstand, where her phone charger still sat. She might have taken her phone with her, but I knew there had to be other clues, hidden messages, receipts, Something that would tell me who that man was and how long this had been going on. I started my search, opening drawers and rifling through papers. It felt invasive, but I told myself I had a right to know. In the back of one drawer, beneath a stack of old birthday cards, I found it, a small, elegant box I'd never seen before. Inside was a gold bracelet engraved with initials, TM. My stomach twisted. It wasn't mine. It had to belong to him. The bracelet wasn't the only thing I found. Tucked inside the box was a receipt for an expensive restaurant downtown. The date was from 3 weeks ago, a night Francine had claimed to be working late. The dots were starting to connect, each discovery tightening the knot in my chest. This wasn't some fleeting mistake. It was deliberate. But the most damning evidence was on our shared laptop. I almost didn't check. It felt too obvious, but something told me to try. Sure enough, when I opened her email, I found a thread of messages between her and the mysterious TM. His name was Trevor Morgan, and judging by the tone of their exchanges, he wasn't just some fling. He was her escape plan, her future. I can't wait to see you again. Elwood has no idea. I feel so alive when I'm with you. You deserve better than him, Francine. I'll give you the life you deserve. Just say the word. Every word was a dagger, cutting deeper and deeper. Trevor Morgan. The name felt like poison on my tongue. I wanted to hate him, but the truth was, my anger was aimed squarely at Francine. She was the one who had vowed to stand by me, for better or worse. She was the one who had chosen to destroy everything we'd built. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. My mind raced with questions. How had I missed the signs? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. My heart raced as I glanced out the window. It wasn't Francine. It was a sleek black car, the kind you'd expect to see parked outside a high-end office building. My jaw tightened as the driver's side door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. Trevor Morgan. He had the audacity to show up at my house. I stood frozen by the window, watching as Trevor Morgan strode confidently toward my front door. He looked every bit the part of the powerful man I'd seen with Francine the night before. Expensive suit, polished shoes, and an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. My heart was pounding in my chest, anger and disbelief mixing into a volatile cocktail of emotions. What gave him the right to come here? To stand on my doorstep like he owned the place? The knock at the door was firm and deliberate, a sound that echoed through the house like a challenge. I hesitated for a moment, my fists clenching at my sides. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, but I also knew I couldn't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door and swung it open. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sharp and cold. Trevor's eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, he looked taken aback. Maybe he hadn't expected me to answer. Maybe he thought Francine would be the one to greet him. But he quickly recovered, flashing a smile that only fueled my rage. "Elwood," he said smoothly, as if we were old friends, "I think we need to talk." "Do we?" I shot back, crossing my arms over my chest. "Because I don't recall inviting you to my home." He raised his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just thought it might be better if we cleared the air. Man to man." "Man to man," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. Funny choice of words, considering you're sleeping with my wife. Trevor had the audacity to smirk. "Look, I get it. You're upset. But Francine, don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare say her name like you know her better than I do." For the first time, his confidence seemed to waver. Good. Let him feel just a fraction of the chaos he'd unleashed in my life. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and Trevor took an instinctive step back. "You don't belong here," I said, my voice low and steady. "Whatever lies Francine told you, whatever fantasy you've built up in your head, it doesn't matter. This is my house, my life, and you're not a part of it." Trevor's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it out to me, and I glanced at it without taking it. "What's this supposed to be?" I asked. "My number," he said simply. "In case you ever want to I mean it, Elwood." This doesn't have to get ugly. I respect you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You respect me? That's rich, coming from the guy sneaking around with my wife. Get off my property, Trevor. Now. For a moment, he just stood there, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, slipping the card back into his pocket. All right, he said. But this isn't over. Francine deserves to be happy, and whether you like it or not, I'm part of that now. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, and I knew if I said another word, I'd lose what little control I had left. Trevor turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing in the doorway, seething with anger and disbelief. As his car disappeared down the street, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my head spinning. The nerve of that man, coming to my home, acting like he was the hero in this twisted story. And Francine, how could she let this happen? How could she choose someone like him over the life we'd built together? I didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Trevor was right about that. But I wasn't about to let him or Francine dictate how this story ended. After Trevor left, I paced the house like a caged animal. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control, questions I didn't have answers to. I couldn't believe the arrogance of that man, walking up to my door, acting like I was some obstacle in his way. And Francine, how could she let him invade our life like this? How long had she been plotting this betrayal behind my back? The house felt suffocating, every corner filled with memories of a life I thought was real. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket, walked out to my car, and drove without a destination. The quiet hum of the engine was my only companion as I tried to sort through the chaos in my head. I ended up at a park on the edge of town, a place Francine and I used to visit when we were younger. It was almost empty now, the fading daylight casting long shadows over the benches and pathways. I sat on a bench overlooking the lake, the water rippling gently in the breeze. This place used to bring me peace. Now, it only reminded me of what I'd lost. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Francine's name on the screen. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the desperate hope that she had some kind of explanation that made sense, even though I knew there wasn't one. I answered. Elwood, she said, her voice trembling. Please, let me explain. Explain what? I snapped. How you've been lying to me for God knows how long. How you invited that. I stopped myself, taking a deep breath. Just tell me the truth, Francine. How long has this been going on? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture her sitting somewhere with her head in her hands, trying to find the right words. But no words could fix this. 6 months, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of deception. Half a year of coming home to me, looking me in the eye, and pretending everything was fine. The weight of her confession hit me like a truck, and I struggled to keep my composure. Why, Francine? I asked, my voice cracking. What did I do? What wasn't enough for you? It's not about you, she said quickly. You didn't do anything wrong, Elwood. I swear. I don't know. I felt trapped, like I wasn't living the life I was supposed to. And then Trevor came along, and he made me feel, I interrupted, my anger flaring. Don't you dare tell me how he made you feel. I don't want to hear it. I'm sorry, she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice cold. You didn't just hurt me, Francine. You destroyed everything we had. Was it worth it? Was he worth it? She didn't answer. The silence on the other end of the line said more than words ever could. I hung up. Back at the house, I sat alone in the dark, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Her confession replayed in my mind, over and over again. 6 months. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, of choosing someone else over me. And for what? Because she felt trapped? Because I wasn't exciting enough for her anymore? I thought about Trevor, about the way he had looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I thought about Francine, about the woman I had loved for 10 years who now felt like a stranger. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but more than that, I felt hollow, empty. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in the ruins of our marriage. Something had to change. I had to take control of my life again, even if it meant walking away from everything I thought I knew. But before I could do that, there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to confront Francine, face to face. The next day, I woke up in a fog. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, Trevor's smug face at my door, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. I couldn't hide from this anymore. I had to face Francine. I had to look her in the eyes and hear the truth straight from her. No more texts, no more phone calls. Around noon, I drove to her sister's house, where she had said she was staying. It was a modest home on the outskirts of town, one I'd been to many times for holidays and family get-togethers. The driveway was empty when I pulled up, but her car was parked on the curb. She was here. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding like a war drum. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer, but then the door creaked open, and there she was. Francine stood there, looking like a shadow of the woman I'd married. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She was wearing an old sweatshirt of mine, and for a split second, I felt a pang of sadness, memories of better times flashing through my mind. But the sadness quickly gave way to anger. "Elwood," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't speak as I walked past her into the living room. The house smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, and the blinds were half drawn, letting in slivers of sunlight. Francine followed me, wringing her hands nervously. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I turned to face her, my expression cold and unyielding. "You know why I'm here. I want answers. And this time, I want the truth. No excuses, no half-truths. Just tell me why you did it, Francine." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I already told you," she murmured. I felt trapped. I don't even know who I am anymore. And Trevor, he made me feel alive? I cut her off, my voice dripping with bitterness. "Special? Like you could escape your boring life with your boring husband?" Her head snapped up, her eyes filled with guilt. "That's not fair, Elwood. It wasn't about you. Don't you dare tell me this wasn't about me." I snapped, my voice rising. "You made it about me the second you decided to lie to my face, to betray me in our own home. I gave you everything, Francine. Everything. And this is how you repay me?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. She had cried her crocodile tears before, and they didn't mean a thing to me now. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she choked out. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you." "You didn't want to lose me?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Francine, you lost me the moment you chose him. The moment you decided he was worth more to you than the life we built together." She crumpled onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, unmoving, feeling like a stranger in what used to be my own story. Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't soften me. They didn't change the fact that she had destroyed everything we had. "What's your plan now?" I asked after a long silence. "Are you going to run off with Trevor? Start a new life with him?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know," she admitted. He says he loves me. He says he wants to take care of me. But I don't know if I can trust him." I almost laughed again. "You don't know if you can trust him? Francine, you can't even trust yourself?" Her face crumpled again, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the reality of the situation. This wasn't my burden to bear anymore. I had spent 10 years trying to make her happy, and it still wasn't enough. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I'm done, Francine," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, Elwood, please," she begged, reaching for me. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can—" "No," I said firmly, stepping back. "You don't get to ask me for forgiveness after what you've done. This isn't something you can fix with therapy or empty promises. It's over, Francine. The finality of my words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. She broke down completely, collapsing into herself as sobs racked her body. I felt nothing but a hollow ache, a void where my love for her used to be. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of her betrayal was still there, but I had taken the first step toward freeing myself from it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done living in the shadow of Francine's lies. It was time to rebuild, to find myself again. As I drove away, her house disappearing in the rearview mirror, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the end of one chapter, but it wasn't the end of my story. Driving away from Francine that day felt like a chapter slamming shut, but it also left me with an unbearable silence. The road stretched ahead, the sun glaring down, but inside, I felt cold, hollow. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I needed to keep moving. I couldn't let the weight of what had happened crush me, not now, not when I'd finally taken a step toward reclaiming my life. I ended up back at the park, the same place I had gone to the night after discovering her betrayal. The lake looked the same, calm, untouched. But this time, the quiet didn't feel as suffocating. I sat on the same bench, staring out at the water, letting the reality of my decision sink in. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind, unfamiliar and heavy. I had never thought I'd be the kind of man who would have to start over, but here I was. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed again. I expected to see Francine's name, another desperate plea to talk, but it wasn't her. It was my sister, Marla. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Elwood," she said, her voice immediately soft and concerned. "Are you okay? I've been worried about you." Marla had always been the one to check in, the one who could sense when something wasn't right. I wanted to lie, to tell her I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, my voice broke as I said, "I don't know, Marla. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again." She didn't rush me, didn't push for details. She just let me talk. For the first time, I told someone the whole story, how I'd found Francine with Trevor, how she had admitted to the affair, how she had shattered everything we'd built. The words spilled out like a dam breaking, and when I was done, I felt lighter, even if only slightly. "Elwood," Marla said gently, "you didn't deserve this. None of it. You gave her everything, and she threw it away. But this doesn't define you. You're stronger than this." I wanted to believe her, but all I could see were the ruins of my life. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Everything feels broken." "You start by putting one foot in front of the other," she said. "Take it one day at a time. And if you need help, you've got me. You don't have to go through this alone." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. I thanked Marla and promised to keep her updated. After hanging up, I sat there for a while longer, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Maybe Marla was right. Maybe this was a chance to rebuild, to figure out who I was outside of my marriage to Francine. That night, I started making a plan. I knew I needed to meet with a lawyer to start the divorce process, but more than that, I needed to reclaim my life. I went through the house, packing up Francine's belongings piece by piece. Each item felt like a weight lifted, a step closer to freeing myself from her shadow. As I worked, I found myself stumbling upon memories, photos of vacations, anniversary cards, little mementos from the life we'd shared. They hurt to look at, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Instead, I packed them into a box and shoved it into the back of a closet. Maybe someday I'd be ready to deal with them, but not now. When the house was finally free of her presence, I sat on the couch and looked around. It felt strange, empty, but it also felt like mine again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to think about the future. Not the one I had planned with Francine, but a new one. A blank slate. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. The meeting was clinical, focused on dividing assets and filing paperwork, but it felt like a necessary step. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Denise, was straightforward and efficient. She didn't sugarcoat anything, but she also gave me hope that I could come out of this stronger. As I left her office, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was happening. The life I had known was over, and there was no going back. But as painful as that realization was, it also felt freeing. I wasn't tied to Francine's lies anymore. I could build something new, something better. But just as I began to think I could move forward, life had one more curveball to throw my way. A few nights later, I was sitting on the couch, flipping mindlessly through TV channels, when there was a knock at the door. My stomach tightened, the memory of Trevor's visit still fresh in my mind. I hesitated for a moment before getting up and opening the door. Standing there was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair and a nervous expression. I didn't recognize her, but there was something familiar about her face. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice wary. She hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Are you Elwood?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who are you?" She bit her lip, her eyes darting to the ground before meeting mine again. "My name is Amelia," she said. I'm Trevor Morgan's daughter." I looked at Amelia, feeling a mix of emotions. She had brought me undeniable proof that Trevor wasn't just some guy Francine had fallen for. He was a manipulator, a man who had spent years destroying lives and moving on without consequence. But more than that, she had given me something unexpected, a way to finally close this chapter of my life and move forward. I thanked her for her honesty and for having the courage to come to me. She could have ignored what her father was doing, but instead, she chose the truth. That meant more than she probably realized. The next day, I met with Francine. She looked exhausted, like the weight of everything had finally crashed down on her. She was a far cry from the woman who once confidently stood in our home, convinced that Trevor was her escape. When I placed the envelope with the photos and emails in front of her, she hesitated before picking it up. As she flipped through the evidence, her hands trembled, and finally, she buried her face in her palms. "I was such a fool," she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, you were. But now you know the truth. So what are you going to do about it?" She stayed silent for a long time before finally looking up at me. "I don't know, Elwood. But you're right. We can't go back." Those were the words I needed to hear. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of peace. In the following weeks, Francine cut ties with Trevor. I didn't follow the details of their fallout. It wasn't my problem anymore. She never tried to come back to me, and I never gave her the chance. Some things can't be repaired, and I wasn't about to waste my life trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. I focused on myself instead. I started hiking again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with old friends who I had unintentionally distanced myself from during my marriage. I even started looking into new job opportunities, ones that would take me out of this town and away from the past that had tried to break me. One evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia. "Thank you for listening. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." For the first time in months, I smiled. Maybe I would. And this time, it would be on my own terms.